And hello again, and here we are back in my garage, and today I've been working on wiring up the electrics on my Kawasaki Z650. And as part of that process, I'm using this so-called D-box from the German company Electronic Box, run by a chap called Axel Joost. And I thought I'd do a quick review of this D-box and compare it to the other German company, Moto Gadget, and their M-Unit, because I've used both before. Both the basic version of the M-Unit and the more advanced version, the so-called Blue, which includes Bluetooth connectivity. So, what can we say about the D-Box? Well, first of all, before we begin, it's very important to understand the difference to the wiring this thing makes compared to a standard setup. Therefore, with no expense spent, I've drawn up a simple diagram. And so here we have a very simple circuit that you might find on your bike, in this case to power the horn. So we'll start off with the battery, which has a positive and negative terminal. We then get a wire from the positive terminal which goes through your ignition switch. So when you turn on your bike, that switch is closed and the circuit continues. Power then flows through a fuse, hopefully, on your bike to protect the circuit. It then may go through a relay, although probably not on something as low powered as your horn. The power then goes through a wire to your handlebars to switchgear where your horn button is. So when you press your horn button, that closes that circuit and power continues through a wire all the way to your horn. Now the horn has two terminals in it. One terminal takes the power in and one terminal takes the power out, the current out, back to earth. That means earth symbol there, which basically means there's a wire going from the horn all the way back to the negative terminal on your battery. And that's the way it works. As soon as you either turn the ignition switch off or you stop pressing the horn button, the circuit's broken and the horn stops making a noise. So far, so good. Let's compare that circuit with one when you're using a control box like the M-Unit or the D-box here. So, here we have a new circuit, hopefully still in focus there. So again, we've got the battery, positive and negative earth, we've still got our ignition switch, we've still got the horn, which is earthed, and we've still got the horn button, but after that it's all different. So the power goes through the ignition switch again, but this time it goes into the D-box, and to complete the circuit inside the D-box, it's also earthed, which means power goes back to the negative terminal on the battery. We still have a wire out of the D-box on the output side going to the horn, which is in turn earthed, which means there's a wire going from the horn back to the negative terminal on the battery. So far so good. But where things are different is on the input side with this little horn button here, because it's simply got a wire out of the D-box which is then turned into another earth. What the heck's going on there? What's happening is the CPU inside the D-box, this little electronic brain, is constantly trying to send a little current through the horn button, which is then earthed. But of course, when you're not pressing it, nothing happens. But as soon as you press the horn button, that current is earthed. And the little brain inside the D-box sees that and says, haha, you pressed the button. And straight away it causes power to be sent out of the D-box to the horn, which then works. As soon as you let go of the horn button, that circuit is broken, it's no longer earthed. The brain of the D-box sees that and cuts the power to the horn. So there's no direct link between the input side, the horn, and the component you're powering, in this case the horn here. All that is done inside of the D-box. It also doesn't need a fuse because each of the circuits inside the D-box have their own electronic fuse, and nor do you need any relays because again that's built into the D-box. There's one exception to that, which is the relay used on the starter motor, because that's very powerful current, and the maximum current this thing can take on that circuit is 20 amps, which might not be enough, so you still want to use the standard starter solenoid or relay on your bike for that particular circuit to start your bike. Yeah, so that's it. So there's a D-box version and there's the standard factory version, if you like. So it's important you understand the difference between the two. And so with those differences explained, I'll now go through the things I like about the D-Box and the things I don't like about the D-Box. And the first thing I like is it's quite small and quite light. It's probably about half the size and half the weight of an M-Unit. Next thing is it comes pre-wired with all the wires already installed. So that's pretty good, unlike of course the M-Unit. And the final thing I like about it is it's cheap. It's very cheap compared to an M-Unit Blue. Now, an M-Unit Blue is currently around £330 to £340, depending on who you buy it from. Whereas this thing, which I bought direct from Germany, cost me £160. So it's about half the price. That said, of course, it doesn't have the full functionality of an M-Unit. That said, I think the philosophy of the D-Box is different from that of the M-Unit, because Axel Joost makes several different kinds of electronic control box which do different things, so that each one's a bit different. Whereas Moto Gadget make their M-Unit to be all singing, all dancing, it does everything. But that makes it more complicated to use, more complicated to set up, whereas this thing is much simpler and easier to use and set up. You can program it, by the way. There are some simple yes/no options which you set up via the indicators once you've wired the unit to the bike. Now, Axel has some really good, clear YouTube videos which explain how it works and which particular version of his control box you should buy. So it's well worth looking into that on YouTube if you're considering buying something like this. And so now let's move on to what I don't like about the D-Box. And first of all, there's no way of mounting it to the bike. The M-Unit comes with two mounting holes, which is great, but this comes with nothing at all. So you've got to work out your own way of mounting it to your bike. And so in my case, on the Kawasaki Z650, I decided to use heavy-duty Velcro to mount it to the side of the battery box. I've used heavy-duty Velcro before and it works really, really well. It's much stronger than you might imagine, so that's what I'm using. But it's up to you to decide how to mount your control box. And so the second thing I don't like about the D-Box, which actually shares with the Moto Gadget M-Unit, is that the wiring that goes from your switches into the D-Box are a very, very fine gauge. They seem a bit too delicate for a motorbike, and it makes it more difficult to attach the terminals and so on. Now, I've done it, but I think it would have been better if these wires were slightly thicker gauge, a bit more robust on a motorbike. I'm sure they're fine, and I'm sure that these take a very small ampage, so they don't need to be very thick, but yeah, I would have liked them to be a bit thicker. And finally, and it is now a bit nitpicking, I bought the D-Box from Germany, so the instructions I got with the D-Box were in German, but that's not a big problem because on the website they do have everything also in English, so you get a PDF, download it, and away you go. That said, the English instructions have obviously been converted or translated from German, and you can tell because there's a couple of things that aren't very clear on the instructions. So that's a small point, but I thought I'd throw it out there. So there's things I like and what I don't like. And finally, the D-Box only has one output wire, which it calls ignition. Now, obviously that takes 12 volts when you turn on your bike. Now you might think that's okay, that will drive the ignition system. But on your bike, you need a lot more connections than that, because that same wire has to also power the coils, your speedo tacho unit, perhaps your speedo sender, maybe a GPS speedo sender, all kinds of things. Any accessories you want to fit on your bike, like a USB port, for example. So what you must do when you're designing your wiring harness for the bike is you must find a way of distributing power from that one wire to go to all these different components on your bike. And I've had to do that same thing actually with the M-Unit, because it has more than one port for that. It's got, I think, altogether 4, but on some bikes you need maybe 6, 7, 8 different circuits to power various parts on the bike. So you have to find a way of distributing the power around the bike to those particular components. So that's a bit of a point to make. Yeah, so that's it really. And so in conclusion then, would I buy a D-Box over an M-Unit? And the answer is yes, I would, because A, it's half the price. It's much simpler to use, it's much less complicated to set up. Yes, it doesn't have the functionality of an M-Unit, but maybe if you're like me, you're working on bikes from the 70s and 80s, you don't need all that functionality and complexity of an M-Unit. For me, I don't need to talk to my bike via my phone, so something like the D-Box works very well for me. So yeah, there's a quick overview of the D-Box. Now, there are other types of boxes from this company, and I think there's one called a B-Box, one called an F-Box, and so on. And they also offer kind of piggyback boxes which work in conjunction with their standard D-Box or B-Box, and they do things like allow you to have a keyless ignition system. So that's something to know about, and all of that is explained on the website, and also there's some good little short videos on YouTube from Axel where he explains which particular box you need to buy and how they work. And so there's a very quick review of this D-Box from Axel Joost in Germany and how it compares very simply with the Moto Gadget M-Unit. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and cheers.